Hello, explorers, and welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For more than 25 years, Reach the World has sparked student curiosity, bringing real-world adventure, fresh perspectives, and career pathways into K-12 classrooms through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and today is the first live stream event for Reach the World's newest Explorer program, Virtual Exchange, which we are calling the Monsters of Hungary. We will explain that today. If you're wondering what that means exactly, we are so lucky to connect live today with our Explorer guide for this program, Fulbright U.S. student program researcher Kyla Jernigan. Kyla will be joining me live from Budapest, Hungary in just a moment to introduce herself, her work, and preview the journey ahead. But first, have you read Kyla's latest virtual exchange articles introducing herself and a very important festival that she attended recently? Make sure you're visiting our Monsters of Hungary virtual exchange homepage for the very latest updates. I've shared the direct link in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Save it for after we're done today. It will be there. Make sure you check out her articles after if you haven't seen them already. We've got a great group of students joining us today, and I always like to start with a few shout outs. We've got classrooms joining from 8 different US states today, including Miss Carpenter students in Kentucky. Hello, Miss Carpenter students. Miss Cruces students in New Jersey, Miss Baylor students in New York, Miss Palma students in North Carolina, Miss Elias students in North Carolina, Miss Ponsart students in Ohio, Miss Lake students in Vermont, and last but certainly not least, Miss Schaefer students in Virginia. Welcome to all of you and anyone else who's joining us live today. To these wonderful students and anyone else, as I've said, who's joining us live today, please be thinking about your questions for Kyla as we go. If you are feeling brave and want to ask her a question, you will have the opportunity to do that today. So be thinking about what you might like to ask. And with that, we are done with the warm-up act. It is time for the main show. I'm very excited to welcome to the screen, all the way from Budapest, Hungary, Fulbright U.S. student program scholar and researcher Kyla Jernigan. Let's bring her on screen. Hi, Kyla.
Hi.
Hey, welcome to Reach the World.
Thank you so much for having me. It really means a lot to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. I'm so excited to start this journey with you. We are going to be talking about the Monsters of Hungary, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we get into that, I want to know about you. How did this journey start for you? How far back does it go? How did you get to be where you are today?
Well, I would say for how far it started back, I have always been interested in movies and creatures in them. I grew up loving the Harry Potter series or Lord of the Rings and loved learning about the creatures within the stories, this particularly also Star Wars. I devoured the encyclopedia books at the library and loved looking through at all the like dissections and different creature designs. And I didn't really know exactly that that was what I wanted to pursue, but I knew it was an interest. And so I ended up pursuing in college a theater production major focused on costumes and makeup. And while I was there, I also had a film studies minor or radio TV film minor. And because of that, I had a really great connection with a professor. He ended up inviting me on set as an actor and as a costume designer, and I started working on like horror short films, which was something I never imagined myself doing, but I ended up really loving, and that got me interested in like where do monsters come from? Where does the idea of something scary and ominous like lurking in the shadows, and where do the stories come from and how are they now translated into sort of modern movie monsters? And that's how I kind of got interested in the folklore side of things, really drawing into sort of the historical and like kind of traditional stories that these monsters originate from, and really trying to understand like, well, why are people telling these stories? Why is this important? What were the messages they were trying to convey? What were the warnings or sort of values they were trying to instill in their children? And then how does that evolve throughout history? So if you want, I can go on a little like case study example with vampires.
Sure, I want to hear about vampires. Go for it, yeah.
So vampires are one of my favorite things to like, or the easiest one to break down because they've existed for so long and they have taken so many different forms. But they really started off as this sort of idea of explaining death and disease in sort of a more understandable way. So you could explain that, oh, this person died very mysteriously, very quickly, and now this is sort of spreading around. And so what if they are coming back and taking the lives away of others? And how diseases spread and they weren't really understood. So vampires were a way of explaining that away. And eventually, though, the form of vampires kind of shifted, and now we have this sort of count figure and this idea of this sort of overlord or figure who rules over people and sucks people dry of their resources and their energy and their money. And it kind of shows the shift from this fear of sort of death and disease to more of a fear of the kind of like overarching power over people. And now we've even shifted again. I'd say we have a more sympathetic vampire of, what does a vampire do when it doesn't want to be a vampire? Or, even some comedic sides of viewing that as well. And I just think that's such a cool way of realizing how far we've come along as a society and how our views have changed on death and disease. And that's not only nowadays that shifted to the figure of the zombie. And how zombies sort of personify our fear of pandemics and fear of the spread of viruses. And there's a bunch of other messages mixed up with that, but that's kind of where I get really excited. I get really excited about how monsters are used to explain things and then sort of the visual way of representing them.
It makes total sense that, some of these stories, some of these monsters that have been around for a long time in our imaginations date back to a period where we might not have known the scientific explanation for something that was happening. That is the connection between the super far past and the present, right? And all the culture that connects everything. How did that get you interested in Hungary and going to Hungary specifically?
Yeah, so for me, my interest in Hungary actually kind of got started on more of a practical side, but also with the festival that I ended up going to. So on the practical side of things, when I was told about Fulbright, I did not know about it until my senior year, or I think my maybe junior year of college. And I had a professor come up to me and say, "Hey, I think you should look into this program." And his advice to me was like, pick a country that's kind of off the beaten path. He's like, that there's going to be hundreds of applicants for all these big name countries and large programs. He's like, try to find somewhere that's maybe not as conventional, like, England or France or, New Zealand. Like, try to find somewhere maybe a little bit off the beaten path. And I did my research. I looked at almost every country on the list, how many applicants they took, how they were interested in either the arts or the sciences, and tried to figure out where I would fit in. And I landed on Hungary for a multitude of reasons, for the folklore, for the safety in the city, and then also because I saw they had a really strong Fulbright program. Now, what I didn't know was when I told my professor, he was like, "Are you sure about Hungary?" And I was like, "Yeah, like, is there something I should know about? Like, is there something I should know?" And he was like, "So actually, we're about to send me and a bunch of other professors about to go to Hungary to connect with their Fulbright program." And he's like, "You didn't know about that?" And I was like, "No, I had no idea." And he's like, "Well, like, we'll see what we can do if that's really where you want to go." And so through him and another professor at the school, I ended up getting connected, and that's how I sort of landed in Hungary. But as I was writing my proposal, I really wanted to focus in on Busojaris and the festival in Mohacs, and I wanted to be able to fully experience that like live and not just through images. And that's really like what I kind of base that piece of my I guess what was the word? My application. And then I also was really interested in how Hungarian folklore kind of has not really been brought to the surface in a lot of ways. And also just how the country has been through a lot of kind of tumultuous either occupations or just some really difficult times, and how the people have really persisted and pursued. And I was curious what that would do as a storytelling method. So that's been really interesting to explore. And I will say it's been a lot harder to find visual depictions as I thought I would. A lot of other countries, their creatures are very front and foremost, uh, with their architecture, with their artwork. However, in Hungary, a lot of it is actually drawn from like Greek classic architecture
Hmm.
and statue work. And so I see a lot of sphinxes, a lot of sirens, a whole lot of satyrs. But I've been having a lot. The one creature I do see a lot of is dragons.
Hmm.
The Sharkan is what they call it here.
Very interesting. I love the idea of you walking through Hungary, noticing like somebody's noticing those details that maybe others don't notice on a daily basis. You mentioned photos, and we have some photos that can sort of provide some visuals for some of the things that you talked about. So I'm going to bring them up, and
Yeah.
maybe you can tell me what we're looking at.
So this is a photograph of me on set for one of the short films I worked on with some friends. And the fun part about this is I kind of went on set not knowing anything what I was doing. I was asked, hey, I was kind of mentioned I'm interested in like learning a bit more about special effects makeup. I would love to help out if you guys have any projects upcoming. And they're like, yeah, we've got one this weekend. Like, we'd love for you to help. And I'm thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go in and like paint her arms. And instead, they showed me a picture and like, do you think you can do this? And I was like, I guess I'll find out. And I was like, sure. And so I jumped in, I took their reference photos and the materials they gave me, and I figured it out we had about 4 hours to do makeup. And it was so much fun. I actually ended up becoming really good friends with the girl I'm painting the makeup onto. And part of that is because later in the day when we were actually shooting, she had to wear contacts and she could not see out of them. So she was blind for about 8 hours of filming, and I was her seeing eye dog, guiding her around the forest, making sure she didn't sit in poison ivy, helping her with her movement. So it was very much a like kind of multifaceted role that I was playing on set, but I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
Very cool. And that led you to this beautiful place.
Yeah, so many jumps along the way. This is a shot from outside the Parliament building. That statue right there is right next to it, and then across, you can see the outline of one of my favorite sites in Budapest, which is Fisherman's Bastion. It is this gorgeous, gorgeous like overlook of the city that gets lit up at night, and it is gorgeous. I just love how illuminated the city is at night.
What is a typical week like for you in Budapest?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mix for me. I do some work from home, either emails or research, and then a lot of times I'll go out to the library and work there. And then sometimes it is just kind of the day-to-day living. I'm going out and getting groceries. I'm running errands or having to do sort of shopping for myself. When I moved here, I didn't have enough clothes. So I was struggling to try to make sure I wouldn't freeze during the winter. And then other things of like Fulbright events. We have kind of monthly meetings where they take us on little field trips to either other cities or to like significant cultural sites. And we have some cool tour guides. And also, it's just a fun way to connect with the other Fulbrighters who all have incredibly different backgrounds and
Mhm.
focuses, but we all really get along together. And it's been a really wonderful unit to be with.
All right, very nice. Let's dive into monsters. I know
Yes.
we want to spend as much time as monsters as possible. What are we looking at here?
So this is one of the first days I got to meet the students that I now have my workshop with.
Mhm.
And we did what I have kind of created as my little icebreaker challenge for people, which is I have taken a bunch of old like animal books, dinosaur books, and hand cut all the animals and dinosaurs out and kind of chop them up into different parts. So I might have the head of a Tyrannosaurus and the body of a tiger and the tail of a scorpion, and they're just all spread out, probably about maybe like 50 to 70 different pieces cut out. And I have brought them to different classrooms throughout Hungary and invited the students to create their own creature, create their own monster, to go wild and combine different parts until they create something new. I call it monster mashing, which is something that actually a lot of filmmakers kind of do is you take like, maybe the scale texture of this and put it on this creature, and now it doesn't look normal. It
Mhm.
doesn't look natural. And it's really fun to see them kind of get creative. And then I really try to push them into thinking about it from a biological point of view of, well, what would this creature eat? Where would it live? How would it move? How would it hunt? Would there be a difference between male and female of the species? And kind of get into the more of the speculative biology side of things.
Mhm.
So, because even as a designer, you have to really think about like the practicals when it comes to making a monster and creature that makes sense, that fits within a world and is believable. So I really enjoy getting them to think about that side of things, along with the design and the storytelling of, where does, what does this creature do? Like, why does it have conflict with humans? Um, so it's both the folklore side of things and then also drifting into more of a biological side, which even though that's not really my background, I think I grew up with too much Animal Planet.
When you're working with students to design monsters of their own imagination, of their own creation, do you often or always start with what the monster looks like, or do you ever start with like the story first and then design what the monster looks like second?
So I mean, most of been sticking with the visual, but I do think those are kind of two approaches I like to talk about. Like you can either start with with the visual and create a story around it, or you start with a story and you create a visual for that. Like there's
Mhm.
no right or wrong way. I think what they've been doing currently, which is more of this creating the story instead of not so much of a story, but they're creating a concept or an idea. And in this case, it's fear. I ask
Mhm.
them, what are you guys afraid of? What do you guys makes you anxious? What is the things that keep you up at night? And really try to think about those things and maybe some of them did come up with stories of how those things would play out narratively if it was connected to a creature. And then we started pulling visuals of like, well, how does this thing look like? How does it
Mm.
feel? What are the textures that we think of when we think of these fears or concerns? And it was very interesting to see what they came up with. And some of them were a little bit more, what's the word? Like, not very concrete, a little
Mhm.
abstract. And so it's definitely been more of a challenge to sort of now bring that into a physical monster that we can now
Mhm.
design and build a costume for.
Yeah.
Um, but it's very cool to see like kind of all these different approaches of you can start from pretty much any point and end up with a monster.
All right, let's go into sort of the traditional basis for a lot of the work that you're doing because you chose Hungary because it has a very rich history of monsters. This looks like something that I want to eat, though.
So one of the things I like to do is I love to go to museums and art galleries and exhibits and really try to hunt for monsters in the wild, is what I call it. And I am out photographing the creature, trying to find the artist, trying to find the time period it was made in, and sort of pull back. This was a really cool exhibit. I wasn't expecting to find any monsters in, but I ended up finding a couple, it was an exhibit on like folk wear, folk crafts, and one was on these cookies that were made from like a honey cake base.
Mm.
And these were sort of lacquered so people could handle them and look at them. But this it kind of is like a cookie mold that you
Mhm.
would push into. And this is of, I believe it's called, or I believe it's pronounced the Ordog.
Mhm.
And it's sort of their version of the devil or Krampus. And you can see he's got like there's little faces that he's holding and in the little basket. So he's kind of kidnapping the bad kids and taking them away. So, this would be the, listen to your mother or the or dog will get you.
Mm.
Um, and I just thought it was really unique. I was not expecting to find it in a cookie form. And I do believe it was paired alongside like a saint figure. So you would
Okay.
have like the bad guy and then the good guy. But I just loved how kind of whimsical this was looking. And it does sort of like you can see the similarities between this and then the later Busho and the Busho Jaris festival.
Mhm. Good. Let's move on.
Yeah, so this is one of the first Busho costumes I got to see when I was in Hungary, and it's at the Museum of Ethnography, which is phenomenal. And ethnography is sort of I didn't know this term until I started looking into Hungary, is sort of the concept of finding sort of physical artifacts and items that connect to different cultures and histories and people. And this museum has items from all over the world and from all years. So,
Mm.
one point they might have, a 12th century helmet from Japan next to Nike sneakers because the way that they view this is that anything becomes kind of culturally significant after a certain amount of time, or after a certain amount of like cultural um, like landmarks in time. And I just think it's really interesting the way they sort of lay out this whole museum, and this exhibit's right towards the end. But it has the Pusho, and you can see down at the bottom is one of the cowbells, which I
Mm.
learned later are very, very loud.
We'll hear in just a moment how you learned that firsthand. Question about like the angle of this photo is sort of taken up, which makes that monster look really, really tall. Was that monster really tall?
They are, it depends on the person wearing it, but I do
Okay,
feel like this, and within the case that this is in, it's elevated off the ground for one. But I think that kind of plays into when you're designing a museum and designing the storytelling of the museum, you want certain things to feel ginormous
right.
or impressive. And I do feel like they did a really great job of exemplifying sort of like the height difference between that and you, but also the little guy next to him.
Excellent. All right, so we have a student question from Miss Lake students, and they would like to know, did you come up with the names of these monsters, or, maybe there's a couple different ways to answer this question, but as far as the names of the monsters go, are some of them are hundreds of years old and some of them could be new, right?
So the names for the Hungarian creatures that I'm looking at are ones that I'm kind of pulling from textually or pulling from talking to other folklorists. However, the monsters that we make in our workshop, we're still working on those names. I really do try to get students to start off with a name or start off with like a concept, but it has definitely been interesting kind of translate. That is where a big part of translation comes in,
Mm,
of trying to make sure I understand exactly what they're saying and pulling that in. I think they have a really great teacher who's sort of like the middleman in this process. But it is something we will have names for. In the beginning workshop, I think we had some very humorous names. A lot of them were very on the nose of this is my cat octopus. Um, and kind of just playing with more of the visuals. But I think as we get closer to um, really finalizing these creatures, I'm really going to encourage them to be like, well, if this was in a horror movie, what would you call this?
yeah.
Well, if this was in a textbook or in a biology book of monsters, what would it be its name?
Mhm.
And I think really looking into that, looking into where these names come from, are they a combination of older words or that are, kind of given new life, or are they modern words fit to a monster? Um, I think that's really interesting if you look at sort of our monsters and our current modern day media. We have, characters that have names like Dracula, but we also have like, the xenomorphs from Alien, like they have more of a scientific name.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think that's that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I believe it did. Miss Lake students, if you have other questions around that topic, please let us know. I was just thinking about how the name really can add to the scariness of a monster. You think of like just a categorical name like zombie, and it gives you a little shiver. And we bring our own like background into the what a zombie is and places we've seen a zombie represented. But a good name can really go a long way. Do you know generally what the names of some of the Hungarian monsters are translated into English, or is it not translatable?
Some of them are translatable. Some of them are more like these are words that end up being something. So one of them I've learned about is like translates roughly to the blood bear.
Mm,
Um, and then, but like Sharkan or Sharkany, that one is just dragon. Like it
mm,
is their word for dragon or their
mm,
word for water spirit.
mm.
So that there are some that have like very specific like descriptive elements to it, and there's other ones that are more on the nose, more relatable, more connected to creatures that already have a name.
Well, Blood Bear did it for the shivers for me. Whoever came up with that one. You went to a really cool festival recently. You wrote about this in your Reach the World article, but I want to hear a little bit more about what that experience was like. Why was it so important for you to go to this particular festival?
So first off, I mean, it was one of the main things I built my application around, and I just knew that this festival it takes place from Thursday all the way till Tuesday, and I at least wanted to go for most of it to fully immerse myself and see sort of like the what's involved. I wanted to go to workshops, I wanted to talk to people, And I did kind of go into it just, hoping for the best in a lot of things. And because there's one website that talks about the festival that gives people informative information. But even then, some of it's translated, and I kind of had to guess that, okay, I think this is what they mean. I think this is where they're talking about. But I showed up, stayed by myself. I ended up having friends surprise me later and coming to visit, but a lot of it was just I wanted to have that sort of on the ground exploration and observation of what was going on outside of just, watching little clip videos online or reading an article about it. I wanted to physically be there.
And when you go to something like this as a researcher, if myself or any of the students who are watching might go to this scene that we can see on the screen, we might have some snacks, we might ride the Ferris wheel, we might just enjoy. We look at it a certain way as a festival goer, but when you go as a researcher, how is that different? Like, are you carrying a notepad and interviewing people, and like how does your research fit into how you experience this?
A lot of mine still, like I said, I like to take photographs, and I do that is a huge part of like gathering information for me. I went to multiple mask exhibitions and tried to really notice, okay, well, this artist added these lines in this place around the nose, or they did braiding on the wigs, but they don't do that here, and like really trying to pick up like visual cues of, well, maybe trying to understand why they did that, but also like how do they distinguish these creatures from one another. And then when it actually comes to the festival itself, a lot of it again was photographs and observation. And then I ended up getting really lucky and connecting with a local translator. Um, and I'll get into that in a second. But as you can see, here's a collection of masks, all kind of done by some of the same artists. But you can see that there is a kind of uniformity to them, but each one kind of has a different element. And I like to notice, like, well, how, like the design, like I guess the design process of,
Mhm.
okay, well, this one has multiple horns, and this one, has a missing tooth, and sort of wanting to understand like what, even if we have a sort of like formula of it's a, black mask with red details and fur and horns. Well, what's the little details that make it individual?
Mhm.
I think that really comes from my costume designer heart of, I love telling stories within the details. I love, trying to fit as many small details that connect to a bigger story as I can within a costume, and wanting to see how the designer of each mask would maybe put a little bit of personality into this creature.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see that these are definitely physical masks compared to some of the earlier work that you've done where you're maybe painting faces and doing, special effects with other methods. These are things I could hand to you and you could wear, or like are passed down through a family over generations. And you got into that a little bit by visiting a family.
Yeah, so the translator I met, he was incredibly kind, and again, I was kind of going about this very um as much research as I could have done, but a lot of it again was still only in Hungarian. And I showed up to what was told to be a sort of like workshop exhibition, but what I didn't realize, it was meant for tour groups that you had to like pre-register for on a completely different website that was not linked at all. And I kind of stumbled across it. I tried talking to the owner, and I was like, do you take card? Do you take anything? And she's like, no. And I was like, that's okay. Like, I'll just look around and then I'll leave. And the tour guide overheard me, and he's like, hey, like, you're welcome to join. Like, and I was like, oh, like, can I pay you? And he's like, no, 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 don't worry about it. And so he let me join, and he was a English translator for, I believe, some people from the US Embassy.
Hmm.
Um, taking what the Hungarian mask designer was saying and translating into English, so that the whole group could understand. And him and I ended up talking, and he told me that his daughters did theater, and I told him that that was my background. And we began talking, and he invited me to his family home where I met his wife and children, and then like his extended family of aunts and uncles, cousins. And they showed me around. They showed me all their traditional clothing and traditional masks.
Wow.
His daughter was incredibly sweet, and she would talk in Hungarian, and he would translate for me like the stories she was telling about the costumes and the
Wow.
dress she was wearing. She was telling me that her earrings that she wear are actual gold, and that was kind of their way of showing like that the daughters of families had a dowry, that they had
Mm,
money to, want to be wed.
mm,
And so, yeah, this festival is very connected with a lot of courting rituals that were sort of traditional to the area.
mm.
Um, but yeah, it was a very special experience, and I had a wonderful time.
That must have been so exciting. You came so far, and like maybe even arriving at the festival, couldn't have imagined that at some point you'd be in somebody's home, hearing from people for whom this is so personal and
Yeah,
getting to ask all your questions.
it was really cool, and it was one of those moments that felt like straight out of a film or out of a book of like, like I was invited into someone's home. It feels very, I think that's something that's not is expected in the US, but in Hungary, it is a huge thing for hospitality and sort of this
Mm,
warmth and openness to share and invite people in. And there was a small part of me being like, am I about to be kidnapped? Am I about to die? Because that's just how I feel like we're taught in the US to be very cautious and very protective. But I've had to take a lot of risks and a lot of
mm,
just like putting my faith in people I've met and trusting myself that if it was a bad situation, I could get myself out of it. But
yeah,
in this case, I had an amazing time and I felt so connected. And he even reached back out to me later and asked if I could give him some examples of American tourism so he could write about that in a
cool.
Hungarian book. And so it was a very cool, like kind of cross-cultural moment.
Well, I can see in this picture as you're standing next to a costume. If I were you, if I was going to be in your place, I would be thinking, can I try it on? Can I try it? Can I try it on? And there you go.
Yes, I was so excited when she asked me if I wanted to try it on because I've been wanting to. And there was one at the museum, but I saw probably like over 20 different people putting it on, and I was like, I don't know if how I feel about that. But then she was like, here's our family one. Like, we take care of it. It's like been in our family for years. She was even telling me that her grandfather was the cannon firer for part of the ceremony. Is this they set off cannons multiple times, and so I could see like where on his costume like still has like the damage done from having to fire the cannon every year. Um, it was very cool.
What does it feel like to be in that mask?
It was very heavy. It was a lot heavier than I was expecting since that's like full on sheepskin.
Hmm.
And then they talk about how they masks are specifically made for certain people. They're kind of fit to that person because, the eye holes are so small that you really can't see out of it very well if it doesn't fit you exactly. And even then, they still have that's actually the role of the bouchonu, which are like the beautiful women, is what they're kind of called,
Hmm.
and they are they're the seeing eye dogs, kind of similar to how I did for my friend that I did the makeup for. You have to guide these people around because of the costumes they're wearing, how
Hmm.
restrictive they are, to make sure they don't, run over a small child in the street.
Well, I thought your description in your Reach the World article was amazing of what the different roles were in the festival environment, sort of what mischief these mask figures would get up to if you got too close to them, how you were protective of your hair, that they wanted to put things in your hair.
As you can see, I have a lot of hair, and I just knew, like, I did not want to have to wash that out at the end of the night. There would be tears.
And then you visited a workshop.
Yeah, so this is the workshop I met the translator in, and it was a really cool experience to get to see all the masks this person has worked on for years. And he let some of the children come up and practice carving. And he just talked about how he studied masks from all over the world, but he makes these masks particularly for the Wushu, to kind of exemplify Hungarians' design techniques.
Great. Well, we have a question in the chat, and it might be related to the Bouchot. I think the general question is, what monster that you made or learned about is your favorite so far? And I think maybe an add-on question to that is the Bouchot one type of monster? Are there differences? Like, could you have a favorite Bouchot, or are they all the
Mm,
same?
I think so like I said in the festival, there's like the main busho, which are the guys in the mask, and then there's the busho nu, which are like the women in the skirts, and then I don't remember if I described, I'm trying to remember what their names are, but they were kind of like the mischief makers, the more like gesture
Mhm.
characters.
Mhm.
The busho are the main ones that I would categorize under the I guess, umbrella of monsters. And I'm trying to think if I have a favorite. Um, I think my favorite, possibly in Hungary, is called the lyric, and it's sort of a idea of some sort of kind of like devil creature, demon creature, but also there's a version of it that's also a chicken, or
Hmm.
like related to being a chicken, or that there's designs of it being a chicken. And I just think that's really silly and fun. And I've tried not to, every time I see a bird, a symbol, being like, is that is that related to my work? Is it not? I think the other one that is kind of very has kind of a different symbols in Hungary or is the turtle bird. It's a very national symbol, which means there's some people that are really for it and some people who are, kind of so-so. But I think it's a really cool way of taking, it's a giant eagle or bird of prey.
Mhm.
And it's one of my examples of how a monster can be sort of a normal animal, but on a monstrous size. So
Mm.
this bird is supposed to be ginormous, looming, carrying people, carrying swords, kind of similar to the eagles in Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
And I just think that that's kind of my way of another example I like to use of like almost anything can be a monster depending on how you look at
Sure.
it.
If I saw an eagle flying at me with a sword, I would be scared. All right. Well, you got to see some more cool things. Is this the same workshop?
No, these are two different ones. The one on, I guess, my right, is one I took pictures of that had more of the fur textures, and I really wanted to get a closer look at the sheepskins. And then the one with the man sitting at the actual stool, this is one I wish I had pictures of me, but since I'm traveling by myself, I didn't get any pictures, but I did get to sit there and practice carving, which was a
Cool.
really cool experience to get my hands on the tools, feel the like pressure you have to like use. So he's got a kind of flat blade that he would press into the wood at an angle, and then he would take the mallet and tap onto the handle of what you're holding onto to sort of
Mhm.
carve away little slivers of wood. And sometimes he would carve a whole chunks, which I really was like, it was really impressive to watch him, go at it so aggressively. And then you look at it and it's still such finely detailed work when you really get into it. So it was funny. I watched a lot of little kids go up, and then I got to go, and it definitely was a lot harder than I expected it to be.
All right. Now we're getting to the grand finale of the festival, right?
Yes, so part of the festival is, or one of the legends of the festival when it comes to the folk tales around it, is that it is the quote unquote death of winter. So they have scared away winter, they are just, destroying winter. It is the end of winter, beginning of spring. And so they symbolize this by having a coffin. And you can see on the site it says Buso Jaris 2026. And you can actually see that there's some like limbs hanging out, which is, I guess, supposed to be like a kind of comical reference of them really trying to cram winter in there. And I wasn't able to stay for the last day when they actually take the coffin and burn it. But they do a bonfire on Sunday where they have kind of the, giant bonfire full of wood and straw. And then they did have like a straw man figure, which was really hard to see from where we were standing because we were so far back. But these were some really cool photos I got to got of like the fire being first lit to when it's like fully consumed and going.
Mhm.
Um, and you can also see like as it shifts from, kind of dusk to night. It
Yeah.
was very beautiful.
I would think like when nighttime came and you're standing around, you can see on the left side picture these, figures in these amazing masks and costumes, that it becomes kind of like a where the wild things are feeling, you never
Oh
really know
yeah.
what you're going to see when you turn around. How magical.
Yeah, it was very, very surreal. There was some people who were trying to start up dancing. Um, there's a lot of little kids running around, which I think that was my favorite. There were several of them that were in full costumes, even as like little small children. And I think that just shows like again how dedicated people are to really sharing this tradition with all ages.
Very, very cool. Do you think you'll try to make a wooden mask of your own?
I don't know. I don't think any of the ones that are upcoming involve that, but I do think that would be a really cool practice to try to bring back home and attempt to do. I love getting my hands dirty. I love like working with my hands. One thing I do think I love doing is making things out of Legos, and I've thought about possibly trying to make a mask that looks like out of Legos that looks similar. At the very least, I would love to try to find a magnet or something of the mask here in Hungary to bring back home to have my little piece of the festival.
All right. One of our classrooms in the chat is excited that their school mascot is a snowy chicken. So maybe yours, the lyric was
Yeah, lyric.
Lyric we'll have to see a picture of it at some point if you have one to see what a scary chicken looks like. But theirs is a snowy chicken, so I'm interested to see what that looks like as well. What would, as a sort of a final question about the festival, because I know that's a real high point for your experience in Hungary, what was the atmosphere like where you said people were starting to dance? Is it joyful? Is everyone actually, like kind of creeped out about, all these scary things around them? Or are you sad? Or what's the atmosphere?
It is a very joyful time. And I think that's one thing that I'm glad my friends ended up coming to visit, because it's something I realized of like, wow, like really is about like friendship and community. And I mean, they do bring in strangers and kind of people from the outside, and that's part of it. But the real like joy of it is celebrating with your friends and your family, and having a drink and getting good food and listening to music and dancing and watching your family members perform. And I think it is like a very much a bonding environment for people. And there is that sense of mischief of there was a lot of people I noticed who didn't seem to mind their hair getting flour thrown in, and would kind of like almost like chase for it and like go after it and want to be harassed. And it was, you could tell like these were people that they know very closely, they know and live with every other day, and have that sort of community bond.
Mm-hmm. All right, very cool. Well, thank you for sharing the story of that. I knew we'd have a lot to discuss around that. Let's fast forward or look forward to where we're going to go with the rest of our virtual exchange together, because this is our first of 3 live streams. We've got a bunch more articles to go, and you have kind of a cool idea for like something kids in their classrooms can do to take what you're going to teach them and what show them and try it themselves.
Yeah, so obviously this introduction, like a little live stream. And so what I'm doing within my workshop is we are taking what students fear and turning them into visual creatures, turning them into a visual monster, and then fully bringing that to life through design of costume. Now, I've done this multiple different times in kind of smaller examples, and now I'm really excited to be able to do that virtually and attempt to give you guys the opportunity to learn a little bit about monsters, learn a little bit about creature design and what goes into the thought process and storytelling behind that, and then actually bring your characters to life through either collaging or drawing or whatever you're comfortable with. That's something I really want to encourage people, is that you don't have to be a really great drawer or artist or feel like you're a good artist to make a monster. I'm someone who likes to draw and likes to paint. However, I'm not really, I would say, like an expert at it. And I have a lot of things that are just kind of messy sketches, but a lot of designers are able to take those messy sketches and bring them to life through a later form. And I think that's something I want to encourage you guys, is that you don't have to have the most polished drawing to still have a monster that could be later on brought to life. And that really is just drawing down the key elements that get your message across or get your idea across. So that's kind of my hope, is that I'll be able to share more about my students' process of coming up with their monsters, analyzing their fears, and how to visualize that into a creature, and then let you guys do that and step into that role of the monster designer.
Very cool. And next time we connect with you live, we'll see a little bit more about what you're doing in your workshop with your students, and that will probably generate some more ideas amongst our students. I feel like I already have ideas that I'm thinking about too, and we'll get a chance to give some more structure and background to that. And then students will have a chance to design their own, and on live stream number 3, share them with you. and get some feedback, which is very, very cool. So we have a lot more to go on this journey. We're like, as I said those words, we hit the 45-minute mark, which sadly means that we are out of time for today. But what a phenomenal introduction. Kyla, it's been so nice to hear from you and talk to you and connect with you. And to all of our wonderful students and anyone who is joining us live on YouTube today, please be thinking about what you might like, what monsters come to mind, what combination of textures, of skin, of body parts you can mash together and put a good story to. And we'll do a lot more of that in the coming weeks as part of our Monsters of Hungary virtual exchange. Stay tuned, please. There's much more to come. Thank you to Kyla and the classrooms that joined us live today. Keep an eye on your mailbox, teachers, for your classroom expedition flags, which should be arriving this week. Very, very exciting. And anyone who's registering for the program will get one as well. So if you have not registered yet, please do so. You're not too late. But with that, that is all the time we have for today. Stay curious and be thinking about your monsters, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Kayla.
Bye.